Alright, YouTube, it's all over the news. An earthquake has hit Washington, D.C. This is obviously evidence that Jesus is coming back soon, the end times are upon us, and that the liberal politicians are to blame for everything in Washington. God sent an earthquake to kill Barack Obama because he's a liberal. Seriously speaking, 6.0 or 5.8 or 5.9, they're not exactly sure yet, has just hit Washington, D.C. Probably did some minor damage to the buildings, etc. But they're saying, oh, well, we can't make phone contact with this agency and that group and this organization, and it's all over the news and everyone's talking about it. And even funnier, funniest thing in the news that I've heard so far, crossing the lines. People in the Pentagon started screaming and evacuating. They were worried it was another 9/11 attack. Absolutely hilarious. That people automatically assume the worst is happening. Like, anytime a little thing happens, people assume it's Armageddon. And I'm sure there will be people who will, I'm sure, and this is my prediction, there will be people in the coming days making videos and stuff and writing things on blogs, etc. about how this earthquake is obviously evidence the end times is coming, that Jesus is returning, that the end of the world is nigh, and repent to the Christian God, because otherwise, oh well, you'll go to hell. There will be people doing that, especially with 2012 right around the corner. I mean, that's just self-explanatory. But, I mean, it's hilarious to see how people's response to a totally natural event, which happens all the time, all over the world. There's hardly a day that passes without some sort of earthquake activity somewhere on Earth. If this had hit out in the middle of rural Kentucky, nobody would care, and it'd be like, oh, earthquake hits Kentucky. And in other news, O.J. Simpson got a nose job. But it hits Washington, D.C., or there in the area of Washington, D.C., and all of a sudden it's headline news, and probably will be for days. You'll see them probably come out with studies about, oh, earthquake resistance in the structures in Washington, D.C., are we ready for the next big one? They'll bring up San Francisco and say, oh, well, when is California going to slough off into the ocean? And it'll be hilarious to watch. You watch, there'll be alarmism after this, just as there's alarms going off all over the country anytime a volcano erupts, there's a flood, there's a tsunami, there's a hurricane, and things get blown out of proportion, because really the people on the news, here's something you've got to know. People on the news are desperate for the next big story, so they'll take a moderately interesting story and they'll blow it up and make it more interesting, and then they'll link it to other things like earthquake preparedness, natural disasters, end-time prophecies, and they'll say, oh, well, we've got this expert on today talking about the end times. What do you think about this earthquake? Well, I think that it's the result of Jesus coming back, and the earth is starting to rumble because Jesus is about to touch down in Washington, D.C., and he's going to take over the world. There will be people saying things like this. It's really scary that people believe it, but it happens. One thing I would say, of course, is that the level of earthquake preparedness all over the country isn't very good, other than in places where they're endemic. Like Los Angeles, obviously, can get hit by a pretty big one and not have a problem unless it drops off into the ocean, whereas Washington, D.C., there's not as much earthquake activity, so probably some of the older buildings aren't really that prepared, but by far not really a major event other than it happened in the Capitol, so it must be big. I actually felt a little bit here. Now, they said it was as far north as Rhode Island. I would disagree. I definitely felt some earth shaking about 10 minutes before the news story went on. It was about 30 or 40 seconds of really light rumbling, but you could tell that there was some seismic activity. It wasn't really anything to shout about, though. It was pretty fun, though. I was like, ooh, cool. I've only been through an earthquake once, a real earthquake. There was a 3.0 earthquake near where I lived in Woodstock. Well, it was 3.0 when it hit us, approximately. It was something that hit Montreal, which isn't very far from Vermont. And the building I was in at the time was very thin, very shaky, and very, very old. So that was kind of scary. It felt like the whole building was swaying to and fro. and of course it ripped part of the wall away on the stairwell. It was an apartment building. It actually pulled it away about an inch from the stairwell, so it was like, are we living in a safe building? Probably not. But it'll be interesting to see people's reactions as this story gets more and more coverage over the next few days, as the media plays it up and beats it and beats it and beats it to death. Peace out.